The Courage to Pray by Metropolitan Anthony Bloom. A discovery. Prayer is the search for God, encounter with God, and going beyond this encounter in communion. Thus, it is an activity, a state, and also a situation both with respect to God and to the created world. It arises from the awareness that the world in which we live is not simply two-dimensional, imprisoned in the categories of time and space, a flat world in which we meet only the surface of things, an opaque surface covering emptiness. Prayer is born of the discovery that the world has depths, that we are not only surrounded by visible things, but that we are also immersed in and penetrated by invisible things. And this invisible world is both the presence of God, the supreme sublime reality, and our own deepest truth. And visible and invisible are not in opposition. Neither can they be juxtaposed like in an addition sum. They are present simultaneously, as fire is present in red-hot iron. They complete each other in a mysterious way, which the English writer Charles Williams describes as co-inheritance, the presence of eternity in time and the future in the present, and also the presence of each temporal moment in eternity, past, present, and future, all at once, eschatologically, the one in the other, as the tree is in the seed, living only in the visible world as living on the surface. It ignores or sets aside not only the existence of God, but the depths of the created being. It is condemning ourselves to perceiving only the world's surface. But if we look deeper, we discover that at the heart of things, a point of balance, which is their finality. There is no inwardness to geometric volume. Its finiteness is complete. The world of such forms is capable of being extended, but cannot be deepened. But the heart of man is deep. When we have reached the fountainhead of life, in him we discover that this itself springs from beyond. The heart of man is open to the invisible. Not the invisible of depth psychology, but the invisible infinite, God's creative word, God himself. Returning to ourselves is thus not a synonym for introversion, but for emerging beyond the limits of our limited selves. St. John Chrysostom said, "When you discover the door of your heart, you discover the gate of heaven." This discovery of our own depths goes together with the recognition of the depths in others. Each has its own immensity. I use the word immensity on purpose. It means that the depth cannot be measured, not because it is too great for our measurements to reach it, but because its quality is not subject to measurement at all. The immensity of our vocation is to share the divine nature, and in discovering our own depths we discover God, whom we could call our invisible neighbor, the Spirit, Christ, the Father. We also discover God's immensity and eternity in the world about us. And this is the beginning of prayer, the recognition of a three-dimensional world of time, space, and a stable but ever-changing depth. A triple relationship. Prayer is the relationship between man and the visible and the invisible X. This is why I said that prayer is a search, an exploration of this invisible world of our own depths, which God alone knows, and he alone can reveal to us. And it is by prayer, gropingly at first, in the dawn of a new vision, that we seek and find God and ourselves in a co-relative way. Then, later, when a clearer light has shown us that we can see what we can see of the invisible and the visible, transfigured in the light of its own immensity and the eternity in God, prayer becomes a state. It also constantly remains a situation. As I said at the beginning, while we are seeking, part blind with the partly restored sight, our first steps in prayer take the form of astonishment, reverent fear, and a sense of sadness. We are astonished at the discovery of ourselves, which is also the beginnings of knowledge of God. We are astonished to see the world open out toward God's infinity. We are afraid, glad, and terrified when we come into the presence of God's holiness and beauty. We are also sad, both for ourselves and the world. It is sad to be blind. It is sad to be unable to live the fullness of our vocation, to be trapped again and again in our own limitations. It is sad to see our world without God, vacillating between life and death and unable to choose life once and for all, or to escape once and for all from death. Wonder and sadness are thus the two sources of our prayer. Both arise from our encounter with the world's depths, which have begun to be revealed to us in their totality. Without this encounter, our world and the forces at work in it are incomprehensible and often monstrous. We are bewildered and afraid. Encounter. Thus, encounter is central to prayer. It is the basic category of revelation, because revelation itself is an encounter with God who gives us a new vision of the world. Everything is encounter, in Scripture as in life. It is both personal and universal, unique and exemplary. It always has two poles, encounter with God and in Him with creation, and encounter with man in his depths, rooted in God's creative will, straining toward fulfillment when God will be all in all. This encounter is personal because each of us must experience it for himself. We cannot have it secondhand. It is our own, but it also has a universal significance because it goes beyond our superficial and limited ego. This encounter is unique because for God, as for one another, when we truly see, each of us is irreplaceable and unique. Each creature knows God in his own way. Each one of us knows God in our own way, which no one else will ever know, unless we tell them. And at the same time, because human nature is universal, each encounter is exemplary. It is a revelation to all of what is known personally by each. Yeah, this is better than beginning to pray. As through a glass darkly. We should try and analyze this encounter carefully, because if we do not know the laws it follows, we may let it slip away. It is always a mutual encounter. It is always a discovery not only of the other, but of ourselves. It is always a relationship. Perhaps the best image for it is a stained glass window. The light shining through it shows up its design, its colors, its beauty, and its meaning. But at the same time, the window itself, by its design, colors, beauty, and meaning, reveals for us the invisible light beyond it. Thus, the window and the light are discovered in relationship to one another. Discovering God in his serene eternity and in the man of sorrows, who was the incarnate Word, is also a discovery of the greatness of man. When we discover the depths in man, we go beyond the front he presents to us and discover his destiny, which is not individual but personal. This destiny makes him more than an example of humankind. It makes him the member of a mysterious body, the whole of mankind, which is where God's presence is. This is interesting. This is an argument not for stained glass windows as iconography, but for stained glass windows as having a place, as analogous to the life of prayer. As not windows to eternity, or, as the priest who was critiquing them I was talking to, because he didn't like that the cathedral of our particular diocese had stained glass windows in it, that even though they're not the same as icons, in which the light comes from within in an icon and draws you beyond it, the fact that the light shining through it shows up its design, its colors, its beauty, and its meaning, but at the same time the window itself, by its design, colors, beauty, and meaning, reveals for us the invisible light beyond it. That this is something about the nature of it is an analogy to the dual revelation that happens in prayer, and so even though it's not what an icon is, it still has a kind of value all its own. I like that. I gotta remember that. Though not icons, stained glass has metaphorical usefulness for understanding the dual dynamic in prayer. The nature of this encounter. However, at the start, any man seeking this encounter is alone and must learn to recognize the existence of the other. And this recognition must take place in a relationship and not in isolation. This is important. We know nothing and nobody except through a relationship. If we are disconnected, nothing exists for us. But there is a danger in not knowing anything or anybody except in relation to ourselves. This is to decenter the universe. In referring everything to ourselves, we deform it and make it as small and mean as we are, with our small, mean cravings. So we begin to recognize the existence of the other. We must be prepared to set ourselves aside to some extent, to go beyond ourselves and to admit the other's needs and his rights to independence and freedom outside us. We must accept his irreducible otherness. Whatever we do, however well we know him, however close we are, and this is even truer of man and God than man and man, there remains a central mystery which we cannot ever resolve. In the book of Revelation, there is the marvelous passage where John says that those who go into the kingdom are given a white stone with a name written on it, which only they and God know. This name is not the label we are given and called by in this world. This name is not the label we are given and called by in this world. Our true name, our eternal name, exactly fits us, our whole being. It defines and expresses us perfectly. It is known by God alone, and he tells us what it is. No one else can know it because it expresses our unique relationship with our Creator. How often human relationships come to grief because one person wants to reveal himself beyond what is possible, or the other person wants to probe into a territory which is sacred to God alone. This is the problem with self-naming. There's an intuition that's correct, that there's always something that is off about the designation we are given. But the desire to reveal the true name within us is one that we cannot even fully know until we are fully known, until we know the depths in which we are fully known by God. And thus it's a name that only we know. And so the desire to change your name to something that is something self-created by you, although it has a proper intuition, it is futile because it won't give us what we desire. It is a vain wish and cannot be fulfilled. It is like a child trying to find the source of a spring and the point where the water begins. The point where the water begins, that point just before which there was no water. In this case, it is only possible to destroy, not to discover. But it is not enough to recognize the other's right to exist, to accept his irreducible otherness. We must be able to see, hear, and judge. Otherwise, the encounter cannot be fruitful. Seeing. Christ speaks of the clear vision we need to see the things as they are. If there is something wrong with our eyes, we project shadows onto things, or see instead the distorted shapes which our eyes form in our imagination. But clear vision is not enough. We must choose the right standpoint. We must find the right distance from which we can see an object whole. Isn't this essential when we are looking at a work of art? A painting or a statue needs to be seen from not too close and not too far away. There is the best standpoint, from which we see it as the artist intended, from which we can see the whole and are not overwhelmed by its parts. The same is true of human relationships. We must find the right distance, not in time and space, but in inner freedom, freedom which is a bond but not a chain. An example I have used in a previous book will perhaps make the point better in a long discussion. In a remarkable book, the English author Charles Williams shows us a girl who has just been killed in a plane crash. Her soul, released from her body, discovers a new world which she never saw before. She has just entered the invisible world, which is now the only reality to her. She cannot see the visible world with the eyes of her soul. At one point, she finds herself beside the Thames. That's a river. She had seen it before as a foul stretch of filthy water, a refuse dump for London. But because she is now out of her body and does not relate everything to herself, She sees the Thames for the first time. She discovers it as a fact, a great river flowing through a great city. Its waters are dirty and opaque. They carry London's refuse to the sea. But this is as it should be. This is their proper role, and they are authentic. And when she sees them as they are and accepts them without emotion or physical repulsion because she can no longer feel disgust for them, no longer having a body to bathe in them or lips to drink them, she sees the depths of the waters. They become less and less opaque. And at last they become transparent. This transparency increases until at the heart of the waters she sees a luminous thread, which is the primordial water, as God created it, and at the heart of this primordial water, a yet more luminous thread, which is the marvelous water that Christ offered the Samaritan woman. Through her disembodiment, the dead girl has been able to see things she was formerly blind to. The same is true of us. If we could become detached from ourselves and gain the inner freedom which the Fathers call apathy, or dispassion, that is to say, the absence of passion, we could see things more and more luminously. We could also see the splendor of God's presence in this dark and opaque world. We could see grace active everywhere and in all things. Hearing